Welcome back to the Soul Rising podcast. My name is Amanda McCoy Flanagan. We are all in on love, loss, and connection here. Welcome back to the show, my faithful listeners. I really appreciate every single one of you. If you are new to the show, what we do here is talk about all things emotion, human emotion, and how it works to connect us or disconnect us from ourselves and from others. And as many of you know, one of my favorite topics is grief and death overall. I just like the whole topic. So I've been having a lot of amazing guests on the show lately to talk about all things grief. And but this is not just a grief show. I do intersperse other topics in there, but I've just been kind of on a grief run lately. So here we are again today. We have the lovely Annie Sklaver Orenstein. She is a qualitative researcher, oral historian, and storyteller who has spent over a decade collecting stories from people around the world. Her work has been featured on NBC Nightly News, Comedy Central, Huffington Post, Politico, Time, and Motherly. In 2020, driven by a desire to share these stories beyond the walls of corporate America, Annie founded Dispatch from Daybreak, a collection of letters written by women to their earlier selves. I love that. I'd like to hear more about that. She lives in Connecticut with her husband, children, dog, and chickens. Yay! Annie is also an author, and she just published a book, an amazing book, which I read and loved, called Always a Sibling, The Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief. Annie uses her own story and those of others to create an empathic, thoughtful, and practical resource for all of us siblings who are grieving. The book is a framework that enables readers to ground themselves in order to process and validate the often overlooked grief of a sibling. And this work is so needed. There's not much about it, right, Annie? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're passionate about this work?
Yes. I am. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and for the kind intro. I am passionate about this work because, unfortunately, I have been touched by it. I am the youngest of three, two older brothers, Ben and Sam. And in 2009, Ben was killed in Afghanistan. He was in the reserves and deployed on a stop-loss order. And he was killed about 3 months into his tour. And that was when I realized that no one talks about sibling loss. And, you know, I realized it, unfortunately, by living through it. You know, I think, you know, number one, in 2009, the landscape was very different, right? Like the podcasts and the Facebook groups and, you know, that kind of online community didn't really exist, mm-hmm. or if it did, I couldn't really find it. And while a lot of those early weeks and months are very blurry at this point, honestly, I have a very, very clear memory of going to a huge bookstore in Manhattan where I was living at the time. And I went to the grief section, which was, you know, big section. And I looked at titles and I looked through the table of contents and the index sections, and there was nothing for siblings. And yet there seemed to be something for everyone else. There were books on losing parents and children and partners and friends and pets. And there was nothing for siblings. It was one of those moments where the silence was deafening. You know, no one was talking about it. And on top of that, siblings are known as the forgotten mourners or disenfranchised mourners because, you know, everyone, when they hear you lost a sibling, they say, "How are your parents?"
Mm-hmm.
Which is a very nice question to ask, but they don't ask how you are.
Yeah.
And so when you're getting, you know, externally, you're getting people asking how your parents are, but no one's asking how you are. No one's checking on you. You know, there are books on losing pets, but nothing about losing your brother or your sister or your sibling. And I, at the time, 25 years old, took that to mean that I was supposed to be fine. My very logical brain was like, well, publishing is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and this is a huge bookstore. And if there's no book here, it's because no one needs it. There's no supply because there's no demand. And so I must be overreacting. Maybe I'm being dramatic. Which is, I want to go back and give 25-year-old Annie the biggest hug. Like, no, you're not being dramatic. Your brother was just murdered. It's okay to need help. But there were no resources. And I really got stuck in my grief for a very long time. I really struggled to process it, to, move forward, to be resilient in the face of it. What happened over time. But I think ultimately this project started as me wanting to do something with Ben's journals and his memory and kind of collect these stories about him. And over time, it really took the form of the book that I needed that day at the bookstore, and the resource that I needed so desperately in those early years and also in the years since then.
I love that you just found a need and you filled it. You created it. So thank you for doing that for us, because as you know, I've also lost my brother in different circumstances in 2018. And it was, I totally understand what you're saying when you say, oh, am I just being dramatic? Because I took it really, really, really hard. And I knew my brother was going to die. And I know there's no preparation. And it's traumatic. It's lost no matter what. But I wasn't prepared. I thought I was preparing. And I knew he was going to pass away soon because of how he was suffering. But I had no idea the depth of pain it would, this hole, this like, almost it felt like a severing of something almost like physical. It was very strange. And I never realized how close, like on a soul level, siblings are. And that's what I've come to understand and realize is that, I believe we pick our parents. I believe we pick our families. I believe we pick a lot of before we come back. I believe in the afterlife and I believe in reincarnation, all that kind of stuff. And, Jeremy and I chose to be in each other's lives. We're a soul family. And even though it's only physical that has been severed, we're still connected spiritually, of course. It was just a very crazy experience that I was not prepared for. And, I think even my mother actually even said, I cannot believe how hard you're taking this loss. She understands. She's lost 2 siblings. She understands what it's like to love a sibling. It probably spoke to some of my other sort of issues and neuroses and stuff that were heightened because of it. But I'm so grateful that you took the time to write this beautiful book, by the way, because it gives so many of us, helps us to be seen, helps us to be heard, to feel heard. You're giving voice to this pain that many of us can't even put words to. We don't have language. So you're a storyteller. You like getting people's stories. What do you do? Tell me about this dispatch from Daybreak. And I want to talk about stories and why they're so important, regardless of how, I guess, anybody else judges that importance, right? Whether you're being over dramatic or you're not being dramatic enough or you're too insensitive, whatever it is, that matters anyway. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of what I do, my day-to-day life, I work for YouTube and I run a global research team there. And it has nothing to do with any of this, except that the research that we do and the research that I've done my whole career is very qualitative and very much based in collecting stories and translating stories and sharing stories in order to have a real tangible impact. So what I mean by that is, going out and doing research on how people use our products, why people use our products, what needs we could be filling, and then coming back to the teams and really trying to get them to be in the user's shoes and to understand the user's perspectives. I work with extremely smart and talented people, and they could build anything. And just because they can doesn't mean that they should. And that's kind of where we come in to be like, yeah, that's a cool feature. No one needs that, though. What we really need is to find a way for XYZ, right? Or whatever it is. And I've been doing this for a very long time, and I've worked at a lot of different companies. And I think I was getting to a point where I felt like I was collecting all of these stories and all of their experiences and translating them back to help corporations, which was great. You know, I like knowing that the user's voice is being heard and that we're grounding this in real people's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But also it kind of felt like something was missing. And the idea for Dispatch from Daybreak came by just thinking about how a lot of these stories have an impact because there's just power in knowing that someone else is going through something like you, or that you are not the first person to experience this thing, even if it's the first time you are experiencing this thing. And when it's the first time you're experiencing it, it's really difficult to imagine how this resolves or what the future looks like or anything like that, because our imagination is very much connected to our memory. So if we have no reference point for it and nothing, you know, to ground us in, it's very hard to project this imagined future. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know if you had this feeling, but certainly when Ben died, I was like, well, then this all ends because there is no family without Ben. There is no future. I had never lived without Ben before. I did not know how that would work. Right. And I really enjoy the letter writing exercise. I think it's really powerful both to write a letter to your younger self, but also when other people read it, you know, you're kind of giving advice to yourself. You're telling yourself how things resolved, if they resolved. Mm-hmm. And when you read that, it's almost like you're getting advice without anyone trying to give you advice. And there's nothing worse than unsolicited advice. Yes. And so it's like a sneaky way to get advice that I always found really helpful, because no one's telling you, here's what you need to do, or the shoulds and the woulds and the whatever. It's someone saying, this is what happened to me, and here's what I did, and here's what happened. And you can kind of take from that what is valuable to you. And I wanted to give that to other people. I will say I launched Dispatch from Daybreak on like March 1st of 2020. And
oh boy.
And then 2 weeks later was suddenly, you know, I had 2 kids under the age of 4 and a full-time job, and was trying to figure out how to function. So it didn't have, I wasn't able to give it the attention it needed early on, but it still, I think, is a very powerful platform, and it's still there.
Yeah. And I want to talk that's awesome. I love that. And I'm sure during COVID, people had lots of stories to tell too. I mean, right. That what a crazy time. That's before and after, right? COVID feels like a before and after thing.
Yeah.
But when you were talking about a sneaky way of giving advice, yes. So I'm in 12-step recovery, and that's what we do in our meetings is we talk about our own experience, and it works like magic because somebody hears it. And we all, as human beings, and I think especially people, addicts, alcoholics, we tend to be maybe slightly more selfish in terms of ego, or like thinking about ourselves a lot. Yeah. But I think it's just the human ego in our brains, right? We process everything. How does that relate to me? Where do I see myself in that? So that's just a very natural way, I think, of taking in information is when you hear somebody else talking about their story. And I say, where do I see myself in that? Do I see myself in that? And if I do, right, take what I need from that, leave the rest, right? Everything that I share, everything that I say, everything that I write about in my book. I was just teaching, I forget who I was talking about. I think, it was, I teach, I'm a writing coach. I don't know if this was in like my workshop or one-on-one, but I was saying how like somebody might read your book, and if they take 2 things from it that they can put in their arsenal of their own healing toolbox, right? Great. And if they leave the other 20 things, whatever, right? So I think it's good. It's great to just put it all out there. And you write your book with, without, and then what's the third part? What?
Within.
Can you explain that and how that also speaks to stories?
Yeah.
And you do use Ben's stories as well, his own personal journal entries.
Mm-hmm.
It's very powerful.
In the process of writing it, I did a lot of interviews because that is what I do. And also because I felt like, I had a very unique situation. We all have very unique situations, right? Like the way he died is not universal. The relationship we had, not universal. And so, like, who am I to talk about losing a sibling you had a difficult relationship with? Because I idolize my brother, right? Who am I to talk about watching your sibling be ill for an extended period of time, right? I did not witness that. And so it was really important to me to do a lot of research with people across the spectrum who had all sorts of different experiences, lost at different ages, different relationship types, causes of death, all of that. And so I surveyed about 350 bereaved siblings and then did follow-up interviews with about 40 of them. And one thing that I realized very early on was that we all are diminishing our own grief. Everyone had some line in their interview about how, I knew it wasn't like yours, like I knew they were going to die. Or, they'd been struggling with addiction for a long time or whatever. There was always a quality.
Yes.
And I would say, was it easy to know that they were going to die? I would imagine that's very difficult, right? Like,
that's me. Yep.
I don't think that would be easier for me, right? Mine was very sudden and traumatic, but I wouldn't trade it to watch someone suffer or to watch them deal with addiction or other forms of illness. And so it became very clear to me very early on that we had all internalized this message that our grief needed to be smaller, right? We need to let our parents grieve, other people grieve. And so everyone had these qualifiers. And, you talk about kind of if people can take one thing away from your writing. I felt like if the only thing anyone takes away from this book is an acknowledgement that they are allowed to grieve. Success.
Huge.
Hands down success. Because I was, person after person, it was like they were talking themselves out of grieving.
And why do you think that is? I would surmise that it's so that they don't have to feel as much pain. If we minimize.
I think it's a combo of not wanting to feel enough pain, feel all of that pain. And also, a lot of people tried to act like they were okay because they didn't want their parents worrying about them because their parents were grieving, right? And so they made their own grief smaller so that they weren't a burden. No one checked on the siblings often, and you kind of had to be okay for everyone else's sake. And I think a lot of people got used to it and never really dug any deeper because digging deeper is miserable and kind of like torture, but helps ultimately. And so when I was thinking about the structure of the book, I felt like, okay, the first thing I need to do is make people understand that their relationship with their sibling mattered, that it is significant, it is impactful, and it is a relationship that needs to be grieved. And it doesn't matter if you got along or not. It doesn't matter if you were estranged. It doesn't matter if they died before you were even born. Their death has a significant impact on your life. And let's just accept that. And until we accept that, we can't really process the grief or move on from it. And so the first section is really about the sibling relationship and the impact of the sibling relationship on our psychological and social well-being and the impact that it has on human development and identity development. And with is about your life with your sibling and why that relationship is significant. And then we can go into without, which really covers that initial like acute phase of grief, the anger, the loneliness, the depression, all of that, which I really felt like, okay, until I can get people to stop the qualifiers and to just understand what this relationship means, we can't move on to that. So we have with, then we have without, which is that acute deep grief. And within is really about those forming those continuing bonds. You made a comment that you lost your brother physically, right? And that took me a long time to make that distinction, that he could still be present in my life in one way or another, even though he wasn't physically here. Mm-hmm. And so within, and I call it within because the way I imagine it, and something that was a really big turning point for me was I always felt like there was like a Ben-sized hole in my heart. And he was like 6'4". So this is like a large hole, So there is this Ben-sized hole in my heart. And I was just walking around with this void, with this hole. And as I started to really work on it and explore it, I realized that I could start filling that hole with other things. I could start filling it with memories of him and stories of him and, things that I do in my life to honor him and remember him and signs that I see. All of those things, I kind of keep them in my Ben hole.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
I need a better name than Ben.
I'll think in
my little Ben hole. And it's my little Polly Pocket sized brother that I carry around, And that's the within piece for me, is like they're not here in front of us, but how can we carry them around inside us in some way to keep that relationship alive? So it goes from, that with is like life with your sibling, life without your sibling, and now how do you want to move forward? And what do you want that relationship to look like? Acknowledging that in some cases you should not carry around a Polly Pocket size version of them. Maybe that relationship was really toxic and there should not be continued bonds. And those bonds need to be severed.
Yeah.
When that is something that you need to acknowledge and grieve as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that last piece really is about what does it look like moving forward?
You really do tackle this thing from all angles. And I love that you laid it out in 3 parts like that. It makes a lot of sense. And I love that you open the book with a memory of the two of you at the park, right? He takes you out of school and it's just such a beautiful memory. And talking about the Ben-sized hole and filling it, I think when we switch from, it's really a shift in perception, right? It's really a shift from, this is so painful, like, I'm not going to survive this. Whatever the, type of the circumstance was, obviously holds different ideas and perceptions about it. But when we can shift to, like you're talking about, let me hold on to all the love. Let me hold on to all the good memories. Let me hold on to whatever is going to make me feel uplifted when I think about them instead of, depressed. It's going to make me feel happy and joyful and know that relationship is still alive because they are now a part of me, right? Like I told you when we were emailing, like right after Jeremy died, I felt him almost like settle, like part of his spirit, almost like in me, it was a very odd experience. And I just, again, this is 7 years later, I just heard him the other day saying like, I live in you and I'm going to use you basically as my hands and feet. And you are going to now do the work that needs to be done, which I believe in heaven, right? Like abundant love and joy and peace. And I think spirit works its magic here on earth. And I feel blessed that I'm able to, I'm open to it. I tell them all the time, Jeremy, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And I'm like brazen now to the point where like, it doesn't matter even how I feel about it because it's what I know, what I feel I'm being moved to do by something much greater than me and not my own will, right? And now it's just how can I bring more love and peace to the world? And I think that is a gift. I say grief is a gift. I say that all the time. Grief is a gift. Somebody listening who just lost their sibling would be like, what the hell are you talking about? But that would be a very insensitive thing to say to somebody in acute grief.
And I struggled with that attitude for a long time. And I think because, I'm a cynical asshole, I guess. And so I struggled with that for a long time. And Stephen Colbert has like a really good quote about grief, being a gift. And I think what I realized, the mind shift that worked for me was it was like, I would rather return the gift and get my brother back.
Sure.
Like if I could like exchange the gift and get my brother, then that's great. And I think for a long time when people would say things like that, I would take it to mean like they're glad they're grieving or that there's like this kind of positive element of it. And I think the mind shift that helped me is like, no, this is, and I talked about this in the book, this conversation that I had with someone where she was explaining radical acceptance. That's like, no, it's a gift in light of the reality we are living in. It is a gift in light of the tremendous loss that we face. But when you accept that this is the reality, you can't get them back. You can't bring them back to life. Then, okay, what can I do with this loss? And that can become a gift. But for a long time, I was like, no, just take it back. And
I don't want your damn gift.
I don't want a gift. I don't want this perspective. I don't want any of this shit. I would like go back to being a cynical asshole who has 2 older brothers. Like, thank you very much. But once I think I shifted it to nothing is going to bring him back. How do I operate now in the world the timeline in which I exist in? How did that work? And now I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I am a better person for having experienced that loss and experiencing grief and understanding my grief has made me a better person. I would just rather be a worse person.
Exactly. I don't really need that lesson. I don't really need that. I'm fine without it. Just give me my brother back.
Exactly. And I think that I will feel that way for the rest of my life,
Of course.
Right? Yeah. Definitely. Like making lemonade with lemons that you did not want.
You didn't want. Exactly. You never bought them. Take them back, return them. Yeah. So to this whole story, again, that's part of the story that we tell ourselves, right? And how we kind of get to that radical acceptance and move into the next phase. It feels to me like grief, just stages, but there's definitely phases for me. I think that's maybe a better phrase to use than the whole stages thing.
Spot on.
Yeah, like we know that stages are not a thing really anymore. And then even if they are, they talk about them in all these other ways. Now we know there's spiritual and emotional, all these other stages. And I think Kubler-Ross, sometimes in the grief community, people could be a little hard on her. I hear some like negative things. I'm like, she really is the one that brought this to light. And somebody had pointed out recently, we have to remember, she wasn't talking about death. She was talking about end of life. She was talking about the stages you're going through with your own loss.
For preparing for your own death.
Exactly. So, but the fact that still was introduced in the 70s, right? When like this wasn't topic of conversation. I wanted to ask, did you find in your research the people that were minimizing their losses and comparing them really to others came from like the people who did that more often? Did they come from more dysfunctional families? Did you tap into that? Was that maybe like a mindset or some kind of way that people operated to begin with? that they had to minimize their feelings?
It's a good question. There were definitely people who came from extremely, extremely dysfunctional families. And in some cases, they were the ones more than anyone who were open and honest with the extent of their loss. And in some cases, I think it was because they had been gaslit for so long before this happened, that they were not having it anymore.
Yeah. I love that. I was talking in one of my grief groups, I was talking about that, how like your capacity for like bullshit and like inauthenticity is just zero when you're in grief.
It was the people, there were a few people interviews I'm thinking of specifically, where their families were wildly dysfunctional, and they were the ones who could say things to their parents like, I can't take on your grief right now. You have to stop calling me when I'm at work. I can't be your person right now. I can't take on your grief right now. And I would be like, how did you say that to your mother? Like, I don't understand.
Teach me.
They were the ones. And now, given I talked to them as adults, and, in some cases, their loss had happened when they were younger. And so it's a muscle. But in many cases, they were the ones who were really good at setting boundaries and knew that what they went through was messed up. And they weren't going to let someone tell them it wasn't. There were definitely a few cases where the family dysfunction, I think, led to some real delayed grief. People talking about how, it's been years and now my parents can talk about my sibling without crying, but I can't say their name because they had not grieved yet at all. They had completely, put it in a little box and locked it up and had not done anything and had only been trying to be the good kid and be the whatever. So that definitely existed a lot. And I don't know if that came from dysfunction or codependence or what. I think in my case, like speaking for myself, my family is extremely functional to the extent where I remember like starting in high school, just waiting for something to go wrong. Cause I was like, my parents are very in love. Like my parents like cuddle on the couch.
Aww.
Get along with my siblings. And I know now that none of this is normal. Everyone else dysfunction and everything. And so
maybe you're the abnormal one. We're all normal.
And I was like, when is the shoe gonna drop? Like something terrible is gonna happen to our family because this isn't real, right? And when something terrible did happen, I was like, no, excuse me, you have the wrong person. This just happened. But also, I had never had to go through anything like that. I had never seen my parents have to go through anything like that. I just wanted to make everything better for them all the time. And so it was almost the opposite of it, where there hadn't been any dysfunction. And so I was like, how do we get everything back
to
normal, And I think I was very lucky because my parents were not going to let us pretend like we weren't grieving. They did not put their grief on us. But I think that is probably more unique.
Yeah. I think so. I definitely think so. But that's lovely. I'm so happy for you that you had that experience. I think a lot of us are in the other camp. I've been thinking about, and you're like an expert on this, so I think you're a good person to talk to about this. Like, what tools, maybe like your top couple of favorite, best, most impactful tools for not just coping. I really don't like that word. Coping mechanisms. How about like growth mechanisms? How about like thriving mechanisms? Like I really feel like there are people who just feel like, okay, this is just who I am now. This is my identity. This is who I am, and I just got to get through life.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was complaining to somebody one day about something, my marriage or whatever, and they were like, just get through it the best you can, whatever it was, something to that extent. And I said, no, I'm not just gonna get through life, even with this massive tragedy. I'm going to enjoy my life. I'm going to be happy and I'm going to thrive. I'm not just going to get through. So can you give us some tools or some tips, quick things that people can really kind of hold on to after they shut the show off and they could be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that to grow instead of cope?
I think what you were describing was something, it was not my natural reaction. And it wasn't really until I started interviewing people and I was thinking about the people who really exhibited this kind of resilient grief versus people like me who really got stuck in it. And it felt like a big difference was the intention. People who were like, I am a joyful person and I refuse to let this kill my joy, or people who said, this is a terrible thing. And I think that the only way I can balance it out is by being positive and finding the positives in things and bringing more positivity to other people's life. Like, I was really amazed by the amount of people who had that level of intentionality about being happy. Even it was like,
Yes.
I'm going to be happy. God damn it. This is not
Yes.
going to change me. Having like a mantra or something to remind yourself, I think it's like some people call it making meaning or whatever it is, but it's that strong intentionality that like, I am going to be this kind of person despite everything that happened, or maybe because of everything that happened. But like they have a goal or a guidepost around who the type of person they wanted to be, And I think finding that is, I wish I had, I guess that's a piece of advice I wish I had 15 years ago or 12 years ago, because I think it would have really helped me if I could have embraced that. I felt like I was a really joyful, carefree person. And now, how could I possibly be that anymore? And I wish I had tried harder to hold on to it rather than now where I'm like trying to get it back. The other easy thing to do, I don't know if it's easy, but it sounds easy enough, is to talk to them. I have conversations with Ben in my head all the time. And it really, some people have them out loud, some people write it down. But it does really make me feel like he's there and like he's connected. And I have gone from, those moments when you want to call them, you want to text them, and I would like pick up my phone and then realize I can't call, and then you're right down in the gutter again. And now when I have those moments where I want to call him or text him, I talk to him and I talk to him in my head, and I just assume that he can hear me. And sometimes there are signs or feelings or something where I feel like, okay, I think he knows. I think he got it. But just that little act of talking to him in some way, that helps me a lot. And that helps me feel that connection again.
100%. I love those. Thank you so much for that. Really giving people permission, it sounds like, for both of those, right? It probably starts with this: I am allowed to be happy. I'm allowed to feel joy. Yes, I'm need to feel my pain and my grief. I don't think either of us are suggesting this toxic positivity crap, but it's just like after, that next phase. Right now, I'm going to give myself permission, and I'm going to give myself permission to believe that they can hear me. It's just really making a decision. It's really making that choice of, first of all, that mindset of how am I going to live? Who do I want to be in the world? Do I want to walk around like a mope? Do I want to be of little service to people about me, my family, my friends, the world, whatever? And then making that decision and saying, no, I'm going to be who I always was. or like you're saying, even in spite of it, maybe being even better or even
Yeah.
seeking that joy out even more because now it's intentional. I love that word, intentionality. That's really what it comes down to. And if with the talking to them, like, if you believe it's real, it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
And I was doing an event at a synagogue in Washington, D.C., and I was talking about signs. And sometimes I get a little self-conscious when I talk about signs because I'm like, people are going to think that I'm crazy. But I was talking about signs and I was like, look, I don't know if it's real or not. Like, I don't know if it's real. I know it makes me feel good. So maybe it's a placebo effect, but it's
doesn't
still
matter. Yeah.
so fine. And this woman came up to me afterwards and she kind of leaned in and she was like, the thing you said about signs, how there's no way to know if it's real. She was like, there's also no way to know that they're not real. She kind of just nodded and turned and walked away. And I was like, Ben, is that you?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, you, okay, great. Thank you. You're like, I needed to hear that. Was it a sign for my brother? Who knows? I don't know. Did it make me feel good and make me feel more his presence? Was there one more little thing I could put in my manhole? Yes. And that matters,
Yeah.
that helps.
And you hold on to that, right? Nobody can tell you that it's not real or that doesn't matter or that it's not impactful or that it doesn't belong in the whole. That's everybody gets to decide how they do this thing. And our friend Nina Rodriguez says, I have no proof, but I have no doubt. She has said that on my
I
show.
love that.
I have no proof, but I have no proof, but I have no doubt. So there's like, you don't need the proof. If you believe it, trust what you feel, your intuition, your gut. And if it's feeling real and true, then it is. And like you're saying, even if it's not, who cares? Again, in recovery, the 12 steps and a big part of our program is believing in a higher power to relieve you of your addiction. And I've had women say to me, like, well, I don't believe in God and I don't believe in this. And I don't, why do babies die? Why is there war? Why is this all this terrible stuff? And I basically said, well, first of all, I don't think God, higher power, controls all of that. I think a lot of that is she would will. That's number one. Number two is, if it's working for you, why do you need to figure it out?
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to work, let it work. It doesn't have to be 100% logical, set in stone, written down in some textbook to be real. And I think that's what's so cool about this shift that we're all experiencing now. And as the years are going on, right? The age of Aquarius, like we're really kind of coming into this other new agey, whatever you want to call it, where spirit is an energy. They believe it in physics. Physicists believe energy doesn't die. Why does that go right out the window? Why is that theory out the window when it comes to human beings? When we're like the most powerful force of energy walking around, I think,
Yeah.
And so I love that you spoke in a synagogue because especially isn't in the Jewish religion. I have friends who are Jewish and they're not into like the medium stuff. They don't even I don't think they even say the word God. Like I know when we text, they do like G-D. Isn't it almost like a taboo thing in the Jewish religion?
I don't really know about like mediums and stuff. I don't know about that. I'm very curious. I always liked that in Judaism there's no hell. Like there's just a heaven, which I always really appreciated, especially in school when all of my friends were like in like catechism. Is that what it's called? And there was like a lot of hell talk there. And I was like, you guys come on over.
Yeah.
But I don't know about the medium thing. I'm speaking at a synagogue in New Jersey on Sunday, and I'm going to ask the rabbi when I'm there. Very curious.
Yeah, because I've heard that from a couple of different people that like the whole idea of spirit and that whole world is a little bit they're not maybe sold on. I don't know. I'd like to know. I'm going to check in with you once you ask. So anyway, this has been awesome. Is there anything that you want to share, a memory of Ben or anything? I'll ask you where, people can find you and everything in a minute, but is there any last word or anything that you didn't say that you want our listeners to know?
No, I think hopefully if you are listening to this and you've lost a sibling, you feel a little more validation. And if you are friends with someone who's lost a sibling or have someone in your life who lost a sibling, don't be afraid to ask them how they are and validate them and their loss. And check out the book, Always a Sibling. And I'm on Instagram.
Awesome. And just your name, right? Annie Sklaver Orenstein on
Annie
Instagram.
Sklaver Orenstein.
Okay. And also, I'd just like to throw in there, if you do have a friend or anybody that you know who's lost somebody, use their name. Tell me a memory about Mary. Tell me a memory about Joe. Use their name. Like, we're not going to crumple apart on the floor if you use their. We want you. It's respect. And it's just, it just makes
It feels good to say their name and to hear their name.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so you're on Instagram. That's where you want people to find you. Do you have a website, a blog? Do you have anything else like that?
Website is annieorenstein.com.
Okay.
There's a Substack that I send out sometimes. There's a link there, but I'm most consistently on Instagram.
Okay, cool. Everybody, go find Annie. Go read her book. It was beautiful. It hit me in so many places. It touched me. I remember I read it last summer and I was at the pool. I would take my kids to the pool and I'd read a little bit each day. And I was just like, wow, this is it's just so great. And it's not just all like touchy-feely stuff. It's that, but then it's also real solid information. You want to learn how to process your own grief or help a griever. It's really awesome. And it's not just for siblings too. You could learn so much about helping anybody or in your own grief. So go get the book. And Annie, thank you so much for being here. It was so nice to get to know you.
Thank you so much. You too.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.